How can we know that Muhammad does come from Mecca?
We can't. But on the other hand, if he doesn't come from there, you have to come up with a plausible alternative for where he might have come from, and why would you want to take that on?
Why take it on? Well, you know, it's what historians do. If things don't fit, you try something else that might fit.
Here we go.
So this is it?
Yeah, here we are.
In the Quran, the faithful are instructed to pray in the direction of a holy sanctuary. But what it doesn't ever say is that this sanctuary stood at Mecca. And to some archaeologists, a few early mosques suggest something different.
We're talking about one of the earliest examples we have of a mosque.
And you date it 100 years after Muhammad?
Somewhere within 100 years or so. Because here, as we go into it, you can see...
This is it?
This is it, yeah.
This is the mosque?
This is the mosque. And what you can see here, we have an apse which is not facing Mecca, it's not facing the south, it's actually facing towards the east, towards the sun rising. This is an example of the time before the direction had actually been preferred towards Mecca.
So the implication of that is that at this early stage of Islam, the focus of prayer has not yet been absolutely fixed.
The direction of prayer had not been well established yet. And
so it's a bit like the concrete hasn't yet set. It's there, you can still play with it, you can still fiddle around with it, you can experiment with it.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Not a decisive clue, perhaps. But it is suggestive that even though there are no Muslim sources, there are reports from Christian writers of the time that the Arab conquerors bowed their heads in prayer not in the direction of Mecca, but in a quite different direction, somewhere further north. In the Quran, it never actually states that Muhammad lived in Mecca, nor that Mecca was where the first revelations took place.
Does the material in the Quran point to Mecca being the setting for God's revelations to Muhammad?
No, it doesn't. I mean, there is mention of a sanctuary. There is a sanctuary, for sure. But where is that sanctuary? That's, of course, we can't tell.
It's devilishly difficult to sort of extract what the context might have been from the text itself.
In Muslim tradition, the people of Mecca are pagans, worshippers of idols. But in fact, the people the Quran describes have a deep and sophisticated knowledge of the biblical tradition.
The Quran retells biblical stories and alludes to biblical stories, not just biblical, but also post-biblical developments. All this is clearly known to the audience.
It suggests that what we have is a kind of response on the part of, let us say, Muhammad, to the debates that were going on in Christian and Jewish communities, where they were debating theological issues and questions that come out of the Hebrew Bible and come out of the New Testament. And the Quran seems to be an effort to engage in the discussion. And so there's a strong connection with the late antique religious discourses that were alive throughout the Near East.
So it's obviously not a pagan world we're looking for. The people in the Quran worship a single God, but it then accuses them of praying to beings other than God. And there's something else. The people the Prophet addresses in the Quran are farmers, agriculturalists, but there was no agriculture in Mecca.
Mecca does not have an agrarian base. In Mecca, it seems to have been quite an arid valley.
If Mecca is this barren, infertile place, how is it that in the Quran, the opponents of the Prophet are described as keeping cattle and growing olives and vines?
Good question. This is one of the reasons why some scholars feel that the text of the Quran is really plugged into, say, Syria.
Because that's where vines and olives grow,
you would find
much
those
further
in
north.
Geographical Syria, right? You don't find olive trees in Mecca.
So if Mecca wasn't the starting point of Islam, what was? If you're following the clues in the Quran itself, then you're looking for a landscape inhabited by olive-growing Arabs who have a deep knowledge of the biblical tradition, but whose worship of a single god might seem to some a little shop-soiled. This is the city of Avdat, in the Negev desert. Back in the early 7th century, it was an Arab city on the very fringes of the Roman Empire. Nominally Christian, but with hints of a recently pagan past.
There can be no doubt that this is a Christian place of worship. There are 2 crosses on the ceiling, but there's also something very interesting in the corner, which is a bull complete with horns, and the bull is an image that very probably is drawn from much older native Arab pagan traditions. That doesn't mean that the Christians who built this were themselves pagan, but it does mean, I think, that they are giving their monotheism, their belief in a single god, a little bit of pagan colour. And that essentially is the crime that Muhammad in the Quran seems to be accusing his opponents of.
But Avdat had more than the right religious complexion. It also had agriculture and olives. In the lifetime of Muhammad, all this would have been green. It would have been agricultural fields as far as the eye can see. Archaeology leaves no doubt that there was a sophisticated irrigation system here that really did make the desert bloom. And so while that doesn't mean that this Avdat is the actual spot where the Quran was composed, it does imply, I think, that the region as a whole seems to fit the wider context of the Quran better than somewhere much further south, in the arid region of Mecca. When you read through and through the Quran, what's really striking as compared, say, to the Bible, which is full of allusions to recognizable landscapes that we know, in the Quran, it's an effort to find an allusion to any landscape or natural setting that we could actually pin down. In fact, in the whole of the Quran, there's really only the one exception. Not far from Avdat, a strange hint about where the Quran might actually have come from. We are on the southernmost shores of the Dead Sea, between what is now Israel and Jordan. Lot was the nephew of Abraham, and he went to settle down in a city called Sodom. And the people of Sodom were notoriously racy. Unsurprisingly, this provoked the wrath of God. He destroyed his city, and this is said to be the remains of Sodom, where the anger of God was poured down upon it. And the Quran. So also was Lot among those sent by us. Behold, we delivered him and his adherents, all except an old woman who was among those who lagged behind. Then we destroyed the rest. Truly, you pass by their sites by day and by night. But if the people being addressed by the prophet are passing this place by day and by night, then what's it doing here? 1,000 kilometers from Mecca. terms of someone who is looking for clues, you are very much in the situation of someone who is panning for gold. And I think that this passage is just one little fleck. I mean, there is one possibility, of course, which is that this one fragment originated in this neighbourhood. Perhaps the rest came from elsewhere. But that then begs the question of where all the various component parts of the Quran are coming from. Are they necessarily to be attributed to one person living at one time? Again, when you start asking that question, it's very hard to know how far to push it.